everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 260, Celebrate Wins. As we get into the holiday season, one of the things I realized we probably don't do as much as we probably should as academic writers is just celebrating all the projects that we've actually completed. Of course, we can look at a CV and see all of the things on there. But one of the things that I worry about with looking at a CV is that a CV sometimes is a form of stress because many academics will look at it and say, well, I still haven't written a book yet, or I still haven't published in my top journal in my field, or I lost 2 years during the pandemic of work and now I can't make up that gap. And, if you've lost time for, say, maternity leave or an illness or something like that. So sometimes I feel like a CV, because of the way we use it, it's almost always used to evaluate us in some way. So it's used, for, say, we're applying for a job, or we need to do that to get into another, maybe another credential, or we want to be considered for a leadership position in our organization. So a CV to me, there's a lot of things about it that's great, just to keep a record of what you've been up to, but I don't find that a very celebratory document. So one of the things, if you have time this week, and I realize we are now bumping up against a very, busy holiday season, but just if you have a few minutes and you feel like you want to do something with your scholarship, I would take a minute to just reflect on the past year and think about what it is that you accomplished. And not all things are captured in print. So I'm saying that because I know I've had, some years where I've had a lot of things come out in print, and then other years where it's been really slow. And part of that is, just the nature of the academic publishing process, where some projects, take 2 years to come into production or something like that. And so one way that I do this, and so what I'm showing on screen right now for anybody on YouTube, is I'm looking at my online writing journal. It's called Penzu. I've talked about it many times in the podcast, but one of the things I love about it is because it's digital, it's searchable. I always have lists of projects I worked on over a course of a semester. Sometimes I'll have very specific steps. So for example, what's on the screen right now is kind of the cover of the little online writing log. As a note, Penzu's free. They're not a sponsor. I just love them. So you can kind of check them out. But what I just clicked on is a bunch of entries. And so one of them is a planning note for January of 2026. We've talked about that on the podcast. So a lot of the time I will use this as sort of an real-time writing session planning tool. So I'll have a list of, hey, these are the things I want to do. I can drop in screenshots. I do a lot of work on whiteboards because I want to kind of remap organization and things like that. And I will just take a quick picture with my phone and drop a picture in there. So all kinds of things are going on. But what I think is really great about this is I can see right now, just from looking in these notes, I have one note that says Fall 2025 Semester Writing Project Mix. So basically, this was a group of things I wanted to do in the fall. And so I can go on that note and see what I actually completed out of there. I also have one that says like Summer 2025 Writing and Other Plans. So I've got a lot of different things. So I'll just open up the Fall 2025 one for a second. And so I have a list on here of writing projects I wanted to do in the fall. So for example, right now it says there's 4 things on there. There was an article. There was writing 2 chapters of a book I'm working on sabbaticals. There was some slides for a project. And then there was this boomerang project that I just have a generic boomerang project listed whenever I try to decide like what writing projects am I working on this semester. And the boomerang is always one that's out for review, and I never know when it's going to come back. So I know that it's potentially going to be in there. I also on this note have a little mark or a little highlight that just says, hey, there's 8 other things you could be doing that are in like your big scholarly pipeline, but I don't care about them right now. So, one of the nice things about returning and kind of celebrating our wins then is I can look at this list of 1 through 4 and say, what did I accomplish out of here? Sometimes the answer is nothing, but if I actually accomplish some things, that's a win. So one thing that I'm doing live on screen, it's very exciting, is that one of the things I know I did is item number 3, which is in my list. I could actually decide that that's something that I've already completed, and I could highlight it. I could cross it out. I could, do something to note that I've actually completed this project. So that would be something that would be useful, I think. Another thing that I could do with it, I could drop it off of this list altogether if I wanted to start a new note in that way. So for, just for doing it on screen, I'm just going to take it and maybe I want to do something to format this text. What's showing up on my screen if you're watching it on Penzu is they actually have a strike through option. I just like crossing them out. So that's what I'm doing. Another thing that I had to do was write two chapters of the sabbatical book. I've done that, so I'm going to go ahead and cross that out. So I'm celebrating some wins. It's very satisfying to go back to like an old note and just cross some stuff off. Um, Two things that didn't get completed. So this is kind of a real look at how to celebrate some of these things. Both of those, the slides and book chapters were completed, but I never went back to the yucky writing project. I've talked about a yucky writing project before on the podcast. That's one you just don't want to do. And I also don't have a real deadline on it. So once again, it did get pushed off. I didn't do it. I mean, it's of course, there are some things that if you're having real trouble making progress, this is also a good look just to see you want to have a win to celebrate. If you don't have any wins on there, then that might mean that you need some writing support. Of course, we do writing coaching. You can ask us to do it. Also, our podcast sponsor, Textbook and Academic Authors Association, offers tons of templates, resources, and all that kind of stuff. So you could use any of that. But I know for me, all right, I got 2 out of 4 completed. And then technically the boomerang project, which I thought was going to come back, some kind of revise, resubmit, some kind of an amazing opportunity, that just never happened. But that was not really on my part. So I'm just going to cross that off because it just never, one of my projects isn't, I'm not going to get it back till January. So really, when I look at this, I did 3 out of 4. That's not terrible. We might say, because we're all academics, we might say, oh, that's a C. That's a 75%. That's really bad. That's not really bad. But one of the things we emphasize on the podcast is movement and completion. So did I make some movement on these projects? Did I get them to completion? In 3 out of 4 cases, yes. In the Yucky project, I actually did do some movement on it. I actually did, found a couple pieces and kind of got myself organized to work on it. Not a lot of movement, but I did some. So even that could be, say, a partial win. And that's not too bad. So if you have a way to kind of look at what you already completed, maybe it's, if you look back over the year, you probably don't even remember maybe that you presented at a conference in February because that was a long time ago. I might think through that. But other things I would consider is to think through what are things in terms of your writing practice that maybe are better. So I clicked over to a note about summer 2025 about some writing and some other plans, and I can see some cross-outs of things that I did. Sometimes, there's things that happened way earlier that you can't remember. So in the summer 2025 note, one thing that I'm seeing in here is an article that I at one point was just kind of dreaming about, was writing an article for Inside Higher Ed on who owns faculty writing. This is one of the reasons why faculty writers listen to our podcast. There's not a lot out there on faculty writing support at some institutions. And that project, even though that was in summer 2025, I kind of forgot about it then, has now been published this fall. It actually came to fruition. And I had the chance to write with a colleague I've never written before, Jennifer Ahern Dodson. So shout out to her. But this is something I can go back in this note if I want to and be like, hey, good job. You did that. You can cross that out. Once again, I see that Yucky writing project is still on my list. So at some point I will do a podcast episode about how to knock some of those out once I knock my own out. But yeah, I would just say if you can take some time and celebrate some of the wins. Maybe the wins aren't published yet, but maybe they're things like you showed up for your writing for 8 hours a week. Maybe you've only been able to pull off, say, 2 or 3 here and there, but you've consistently been able to do 8 hours of writing. It's just like going to the gym or eating healthy. If you're hitting your target more and more often, that's also something to celebrate. So think of it as a wide bucket and something that you can put a lot of wins in. And as you're planning for your next semester, so as I noted in Penzu, I have a little planning note about planning for January 2026 that I'm just starting to fill out. I'm trying to also think at the end of January or at the end of 2026, if I'm lucky to be here, I want to make sure that I'm thinking through what wins can I celebrate then? What are some things that I want to make sure that I do? So, if you're giving yourself time off from writing, good for you. But celebrating some wins is also a way to keep it top of mind, something that we talk a lot about on this podcast. Happy writing this week.